My name is Ivica Ico Bukvic. I'm associate professor here at Virginia Tech in the Department of Music and a core member of the Institute for Creativity, Arts, and Technology. Well, contemplative practice is very important to me because in many ways it has shaped my life for the past 5 years. I think coping with stress was one of the things that I had to learn as I progressed through my career, and I'm very pleased by the fact that I had an opportunity to experience contemplative practice, to learn from my colleagues, and to apply it to my everyday life, which has helped immensely regulate my life. Well, I do meditation, I do Tai Chi Chuan, and I do some yoga. I would also argue that some of my creative activities are very contemplative by design. So, composing music, creating artifacts is something that I find meditative in and of itself. Unless I'm under the gun with some kind of a tight schedule. But even then, I think being able to apply contemplative practice helps. I think it impacts every aspect of our life because the less stressed we are, the more productive we are, the more constructive we are, and I think more we're better beings. We're somebody who we can look in the mirror and feel good about. So I think having children is stressful. Having a career is stressful. There's a lot of things that are stressful. If one can accept that stress and deal with it in a contemplative way, we simply function better. We can raise our children better. We can be better partners. We can be better workers. My exposure to Tai Chi Chuan as well as meditation started with my acquaintance and now really good friend and colleague, Dr. Matthew Komelski, as well as Dr. Robert Smith. Both are community members. One of them is also a faculty member here at Virginia Tech. Since then, I obviously practiced as part of the community that engages with Tai Chi practice through Matthew, but also I've taken that and sort of infused it into my own professional work. So Laptop Orchestra or Linux Laptop Orchestra is one example where I've taken contemplative practice and tried to somehow weave it seamlessly into what I do there on a daily basis. So our choreography is obviously indebted to Tai Chi Chuan, and even though we're just barely scratching the surface of what is possible, I feel that we are already reaching a whole new level of depth that I don't think I would have ever been able to attain without that component. Well, it started out as a crazy idea that gained traction, and I feel that from a creative perspective, human society has always, looked for that next technological breakthrough to apply it in everyday lives. Laptops are one of those kinds of technologies. And so, if I put my musician hat for a moment, I would say, incorporating laptop in music performance is no different than, fortepiano that Beethoven introduced in his sonatas that made such a profound difference. So, in other words, it is just another technology which in and of itself doesn't do much unless it is being used, and used a lot, and used properly. And proper use obviously comes through extended use, something that we gain through experience and wisdom. And so that's kind of how it started. But I think the component that I think is most relevant to this conversation would be the introduction of Tai Chi. And when you think about laptop performance, you think about somebody typing on keyboard, or moving a mouse around. And the problem with that is that while philosophically you could argue that this is, the ultimate economy, using only that technology and nothing else, At the same time, there are a lot of problems because when you see somebody typing, you don't typically think that they're performing music. You think they might be writing an email or, checking the Facebook or something like that, right? And so there's something very much lost when you have somebody on stage performing with that kind of performance practice. Unlike somebody who is, let's say, playing a piano, where their body gestures essentially result in a theater that further convey the tension of the music performance. Musical performances are more than just music; they're theater, right? And so from that perspective, I felt at odds as to what laptop orchestra should be doing with some of the other practitioners of similar ensembles around the world, and I think it's something that has been very much observed throughout the world, and everybody's trying to find that language, how to circumvent that problem of typing on a keyboard and performing. For us, it was Tai Chi. I just felt, here is something I'm doing on an everyday basis. It makes a whole world of difference for me personally, and I know that it could also make a whole world of difference for my students because they're also exposed to a lot of stressors, and I'm sure that they also need that, downtime just as much as we as faculty do. And so for me, it was a kind of a serendipitous event, connecting the dots and saying, hey, well, maybe I could just practice Tai Chi as part of my rehearsal, particularly because, managing a laptop orchestra is quite stressful. Things constantly break, you have to fix things, and so, there's nothing more frustrating than in the middle of a rehearsal, computer crashing or worse yet, breaking. And so it is quite stressful. So I feel almost like part of it was kind of selfish in that I really wanted to have an opportunity to, relax myself during the whole process. So I think that's how it all came to be, and I feel like it was the best decision I've ever made. And in some ways, it has also defined us. These days we're regarded as sort of the pioneers of this notion of bringing the contemplative practice and choreography into musical performance from a laptop orchestra perspective. Another awesome thing about Tai Chi Chuan in particular is that it's sort of a gender agnostic kind of dance. In the United States, we're very, awkward when it comes to, body gestures. And I think, had we chosen, a ballet, I'm sure we would have a very low enrollment from the male population. So, and I think having Tai Chi Chuan is in that respect awesome because it allows us to say, hey, this is martial art. It's slowed down martial art, but it's still just as awesome. And so I think from that perspective, it is beautiful to look at. It's great for your both mind and body. And the question is, why wouldn't you want to do that? Well, we started in 2009. And so I guess this is we are now about 4 years old. And it has taken every minute of those 4 years to get where we are right now. As a matter of fact, on a daily basis, we keep changing and improving things, and it's an ongoing process. I don't think it will ever stop because there's always more stuff that we want to do, and the only reason we're not doing it is because we don't have enough time, and because we're busy doing whatever we're doing right now. So things like creating great, larger choreographies, more complex choreographies involving other forms of artistic expression like video, imagery, theater, and I'm thinking here in the more broader terms, theater, as in like there could be actual story, plot, and so on and so forth. So all those things come into my mind, and I'm thinking like, yes, we should definitely do this. How soon can we do that? Well, as soon as possible. Yeah. What we do is, of course, the things that we use are sort of off-the-shelf things for the most part. Speakers are our own design, and they're designed just like everything else to be as affordable as possible. So in many ways, we take great pride that we are actually the most affordable laptop orchestra on the earth right now. And so, I don't know what that really means, but I think from the artistic perspective, but from K through 12 education perspective, it's very, very powerful because, you know, K through 12 education as it is right now is vastly underfunded, and so, you know, to propose to have a couple of $1,000s per each laptop ensemble station would just, you know, stop the whole process dead in its tracks. So our goal was to really try to strike a balance between the quality, and so we don't compromise the quality of the sound and other components, and that yet provide that accessibility so we can, you know, have that outreach component. As far as the specifics, you know, we do use Nintendo Wiimote controllers. They use, you know, they provide us with accelerometers and gyros and things that until we came out on the market would cost, you know, 5 or 6 times more than what the Wiimote costs. Needless to mention, it's very sturdy. So, as particular when we talk about, you know, K through 12 education, you know, you have kids who might be throwing this around or throwing it in the air or whatever it happens. You know, we need to have something that's sturdy, something that's not going to fall apart. And so, it was a no-brainer choice for us. I think it was also important to capture, you know, the gesture, the motion, and what a better way to do that than with accelerometers and gyros. So, so that's the Wiimote component. Like I mentioned, we have these hemispherical speakers. Their design is indebted to those who came before us. We're technically third laptop orchestra of its kind in the world and the first fully open source Linux-based laptop orchestra of its kind. And so this design of hemispherical speakers goes several decades back as a concept. Today we're finally at a point where we have that, you know, in a fairly regular production level quality. And again, you know, accessibility and affordability are a very high priority for us. And the reason why I use those is because we want to allow each performer to hear themselves exactly where they stand, as opposed to listening to some kind of artificial diffusion from the speakers at the edge of the stage. We want to recreate more of a traditional sound setting where, you know, you can hear violins playing now, or sorry, violins would be, yeah, from your perspective, this would be violins and this would be your cellos, and, you know, somewhere in the back would be brass. So when you listen to great compositions by great composers, they make a very conscious, you know, they pay very conscious attention to those kinds of details, spatial components, so that they can capitalize on that creative component. So having these speakers again allows us that kind of flexibility. And there's also simply the practicality of it. You know, when we rehearse, if we all use the same speakers, if somebody plays a wrong note, the first thing I would have to say is, who did that? Which is not very, you know, helpful. This way I can just say, less of you, hey, fix the note over there. And it's amazing. You know, the first time that happened, I took it for granted. It took me a couple of days to realize just how profound of a question that was. Like, you know, less of you and more of you, you know, kind of thing. So those are some of the components. And of course, there's also the haptic component or the tangible component where, you know, the little Wiimotes have the rumble pack in them so they can vibrate, so we can send all kinds of tactile messages between the performers and the conductor, or informing the performer that their event has played, and so on and so forth. Because sometimes when things get really loud, it's kind of hard to say whether, you know, you've really contributed or you haven't. And then the rest of it is just filler. You know, we have our laptops, which we have installed. We maintain a custom version of Linux on them because we need to have the low latency response that we require for real-time performance. And then we also have, of course, the software that we develop in-house, which is called PDLork, and it's free open source, kind of in the spirit of mindfulness. Anybody can, you know, download it and enjoy it, and if they wish to contribute, they're more than welcome to. Absolutely, absolutely. I think not only at Virginia Tech, but the entire Western society, or the society as a whole, I think needs to change its ways before it's going to be too late. Doing things faster is not always better. As a matter of fact, I would contest that it's never better. Doing more things at the same time is not good either, because it's a sort of a subset of the same problem. We are not multitasking beings, unlike what others are trying to teach us. We can task switch quickly back and forth, like driving a car and trying to text your friend. Very bad idea, but a lot of people do it, and most of them get away. Unfortunately, some don't, and then we have really, really scary accidents. So, you know, the fact that we have so much technology around us in some ways helps, in some ways it distracts. It is funny when I think just, you know, when I was a child, we used to have computers where you would use old audio tapes to download software into them. It would take about 5 minutes to load, and then more often than not, you would get tape loading error, you know, and you would have to rewind and load again, right? And I'm thinking, you know, I never had a problem waiting for 5 minutes for 48 kilobytes to load into my computer. Now I have a problem when my email doesn't go off from my smartphone within a second I press send, right? Our patience has grown thin. I think that translates in a lot of more increased stress. I had a recently conversation with a person up at Temple University as we were arranging a tour for the Laptop Orchestra, and we were discussing how both this person and myself were being stressed by various things. And I just said, like, why do we do this to ourselves? You know, all of these problems we're dealing with are not somehow invoked by the universe or some deity or something else. This is all invoked by us ourselves. We are making each other's lives miserable. So why don't we just stop, right? And I think contemplative practice will play a huge role in that process. And the same goes for the university. You know, university is a huge ecosystem of people and services and students and you name it. And so in such a complex environment, there's a lot of opportunities for stress. There's a lot of opportunities for misunderstandings, miscommunications, many other things. Again, contemplative practice is the answer. But it is not just something that should be, you know, rhetorically supported. It is something that needs to be practiced. And I think that's the key to solution. I don't know even where to begin. I guess, you know, at the very core, we're all less stressed, which means we're more constructive, we're more open to communication, less conflict, less things to resolve as a result of, you know, unfortunate miscommunication or conflict. Everybody's time is precious. It seems to me that it's not a bad idea to do away with things that we don't need to begin with, like conflict and other things associated with that. It is also just the quality of life. It is also the way how society functions. I think we need to realign our values. We're not consumers. We're members of a society. I think our society is too hung up on the idea that we're measured as consumers. You know, consumer, what is it? Spending confidence has dropped so many points. Who cares? You know, that's not the definition of people. The definition of people is basically or the society or a community is in its health, in its both mental and physical health, in its interconnectedness, and many other factors that our society seems to completely ignore. There was a recent graduate at the conference whom I had the opportunity to sit next to, and they were talking about studying elements of community resilience to war and strife. And I can't remember what location they were studying, but it was one of those areas that unfortunately have not seen much peace in recent years on Earth. And what they said is basically some of the key components that provided that stability and sustainability, even in the worst of times, was that interconnectedness, the sense of community, and all of the things that, you know, our media, for the most part, seems to ignore. I don't think I'm an authority on that topic. I sure hope so, but I think it's a lot more accepted than it used to be, but I don't think it is mainstream. I think, again, on some level, I think it depends what area you're talking about. It seems that San Francisco and those kinds of areas are very mainstream in that respect, but then there are many areas around the United States and the world where that is still considered as sort of something that's alternative or maybe not even considered at all. I would say neither. I mean, I think it basically, I think it's somewhere in the middle. So in other words, it's not going rapidly. I mean, I would always like it to go faster than it is, but I don't think it's going slowly either. I think we've reached the critical mass at which point everybody's realizing we cannot continue living this way. And I think that's a good thing, because realizing the problem is half the solution. But as far how quickly, I couldn't tell you for sure. Well, I mean, I'm sure there is a fad component to it. You know, we recently have seen the uptake of that notion in the movie industry and other places. So I'm sure that has played a role in the overall exposure and acceptance. But I don't think that's the only component of it. I think like everything else in life, nothing is that simple. So it's a combination of factors. So I don't think that even when that fad wears off, that somehow contemplative practice will disappear. And we need to also be aware that, you know, contemplative practice comes in many different ways. You know, for me, it might be meditation, but you know, for a priest, it might be prayer. You know, and so I think a lot of these things are interconnected. You know, there has to be a level of tolerance of different religions, different approaches to the same goal, which is basically that we all want to be happy. You know, we all want to be good to each other. You know, and so I think, you know, it's a complex web of problems that need to resolve themselves somehow before we've reached that, I guess, singularity, if you like. Again, I'm no authority in this place. I can only tell you what I've experienced in my personal life, as well as the studies that we've conducted. For instance, you know, the system that I designed, Mind-Body Interactive, which in its earliest iteration was essentially a glorified version of We Fit with Tai Chi practice on it. We piloted this at the Craig County Elementary School as part of the physical education course, and I was blown away by the fact that, you know, some of the static postures that we included as part of our regimen there were actually not very comfortable poses. There, you know, if you stood in those poses for extended periods of time, your muscles will cramp, and if you don't do it the right way or you haven't done it much, it would not be a very comfortable experience. And yet, these kids who typically would be very proactive during their physical education were, you know, perfectly fine with practicing these static postures, you know, which lasted for about 2.5 minutes each. To me, that was very, very profound. You know, I realized that there's something there that we need to explore further. But there's also a growing number of publications that talk about these effects. You know, people have piloted Tai Chi in New York schools where they talk about, you know, lowering the stress levels and increasing the scores before tests, you know, if practiced right before the tests. People talk about, you know, practicing Tai Chi Chuan in among the elderly, where, you know, the greatest number of accidents occur due to falls, and typically falls are a result of decreased control over center of balance and or center of weight. You know, I guess center of balance is the term. And so, you know, practicing Tai Chi Chuan is awesome because in those contexts, it is very low impact exercise, so therefore it doesn't prevent elderly from engaging in it, but at the same time improves their, you know, center of balance, which is critical to their well-being and longevity. There are studies that show that people who practice longer and they have a sort of a lifelong experience with Tai Chi, that they have better health, better outlook on life. So there's a growing body of literature that talks about this stuff. I think as part of the Impact Studio within ICAT, which is the studio that I'm heading, we have very much interest in trying to explore that in a way that will not only validate it, but also provide tangible data points for those who might be skeptics, you know, for those in the community who might want that kind of hard data before they will believe in the process. Let me give you a sort of counter story. You know, this may seem completely out of place, but trust me, there's logic to the madness. Sometime in the mid-90s, I started using Linux. I don't know how much you're familiar with that, but it's an open source operating system. At that point in time, it was in its infancy, and using it was literally like toying with fire. You know, one wrong command and you could fry your hard drive. And looking back, you know, we've come a long way, and I think it's amazing. But the reason why I'm telling you this story is not to tell you how great Linux has become, but rather how terrible it was early on, and how strongly yet I felt that I should evangelize Linux. You know, like people typically in America, when they're stuck in an elevator with a stranger, they'll talk about the weather. In the early 2000s, when I got stuck in an elevator with a stranger, I would talk to them how they need to switch to Linux. You know, so it was really, really messed up. And what turned out to be the case is I realized that, you know, trying to evangelize things as hard as I was trying to do was actually turning people away. It wasn't really helping. And then eventually I came to a realization that, you know, Linux was only for people like myself, you know, who are totally geeky and willing to spend time to jump through hoops to get it going. And then somehow, here we are, you know, 10 years later, after I've stopped doing this crazy evangelizing of Linux, and now suddenly people are flocking to it without anybody evangelizing. You know, now these kids in my laptop orchestra are using Linux. They don't care what it is, and neither do I on some level, right? They are just doing it. So how does this tie into your question? I think the similar principle might apply to mindfulness, contemplative practice. People will flock to it not because somebody told them about it, although I guess somebody will have to mention it to some level or other to make them aware of it, but they will flock to it out of personal need, just like I did. You know, I had tremendous levels of stress. I realized that, you know, my two options was medications or alternative approaches. At that point in time, I was considering mindfulness and contemplative practice an alternative approach. Now I consider it my approach or the approach. And then I made that jump and I made that leap of faith, and when I saw just how good it was, I ran with it. I really love the format that we're going after as part of the conference, and I think it is in many ways visionary attempt at changing the way how the society functions, not only from a perspective of introducing mindfulness and contemplative practice, but also in the way how we communicate within these preconceived constructs like the so-called conference. That said, you know, since I was one of the committee members and organizers, I unfortunately didn't get to experience as much of it as I wanted to. So unfortunately, I cannot speak to great length about all the details of the conference beyond that. I firmly believe that it's both. So in other words, it's mind and body. It's not just mind or just body. So I feel like for me, I mean, I do my Tai Chi, I do my meditation, but I also swim and do other things to keep my body in good shape. Yeah, so I think it's really an integrative approach where both mind and body need to be in balance. I think in many ways the stress comes from the way we live and function, which is, for many of us in academia, we sit too much in front of our computer and we're not physically active enough, and that imbalance actually induces more stress. So I think it's critical that there's a balance between the two. I guess this has been a great experience, and I certainly hope we'll have more of this.